Welcome to the channel. If you're a fan of horror stories, you've come to the right place. On this channel, you'll find stories that are true, some are fictional, but as long as they send a chill down your spine and make the hair on the back of your neck stand up, if you like that sort of thing. A fair warning though, some stories contain graphic, violent or sexual content, so viewer discretion is advised. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Keegan's Gulch, written by Redditor, Guilty Chemistry 9337. They always told us never to take Keegan's Gulch. For the life of me, I can't remember anybody explaining why we shouldn't have taken Keegan's Gulch. They were always very blunt with their demands. Never take Keegan's Gulch. It was one of those things where it felt like if you simply asked why not, you'd be accused of talking back, and you'd still not get an answer. In lieu of an explanation, the townsfolk just sort of made up their own. And for those who grew up in that town, the explanations generally correlated with age. When we were in grade school, we had no doubt that the Gulch must have been haunted in some way. There was an old pioneer cemetery dug into the steep banks of the Gulch's sides. No, older than a pioneer cemetery, a European cemetery with English on the tombstones. But it had been there impossibly long, predating the first white trappers exploring the area. No, that's dumb, other grade school students would counter. It was probably just a monster, like a wolfman. When we were in middle school, the threat had morphed into creepy perverts, nudists, and the like. Maybe that had more to do with our juvenile senses of humor and the mocking of unexplained grown-up rules. In high school, that threat evolved into cultists, Satan worshippers, and malicious drug-fueled hillbillies. Perhaps that was a bit more of an existential threat and less likely to attract curious would-be adventurers. By the time we were all adults, we just stopped asking the question. Just like the adults who'd always told us to never go there. Then the question changed from why not to just why. Why would you want to take Keegan's Gulch in the first place? By then most of us had cars or access to cars. If you wanted to go from town down to the lake shore, just drive. Or if you must hike or ride your bike, take the trail down Mary's Canyon. It's a much more pleasant trip, surely. The trailhead is closer to town. The Two Marys River that follows its course is beautiful, babbling, and well controlled. There are many wide footbridges, and in the summer it offers excellent fishing, wading, and a few choice swimming holes. In the spring, the hiker can pick delicious blackberries, huckleberries, and salmon berries. In the autumn, the leaves of the vine maples and the big leaf maples turn the most extraordinary colors and fall as thick as snowflakes. Even in the winter, the trip is pleasant, with the canyon walls keeping the chill winds at bay. The little creek becomes a noisy whitewater torrent, but because the channel has been so well maintained, it never floods its bank. Best of all, hiking drops you off at the best, sandiest beach on the lake. Not far from the parking lot if you've driven. Keegan's Gulch offered none of that. The trail heads further out of town, way up Keegan Lane. The drainage rivulet that flows down the ravine can't even be called a proper creek. The water that feeds it doesn't even come from a proper spring, it's just groundwater perpetually squeezed out of the mud like a wet sponge. It doesn't flow in a proper course, but just sort of trickles down the gulch's floor, meaning you have to trample through mud and gunk in all but the driest of summer months. And by then the stagnant pools are breeding grounds for mosquitoes. None of the delicious berries are present, except perhaps for the unproductive and thorn-riddled blackberry vines which proliferate almost as thoroughly as the poisoned oak. There's no proper trail per se, and if there were, it'd be crisscrossed by downed trees that have never been cleared. That's despite the land being private property owned by various timber interests who don't take kindly to trespassers. And the reason they've never cleared it out is because the gulch is too steep and muddy and worthless to bother. If you were to somehow hypothetically make your way through it to the lake, you'd find a short that was nothing but a 4-foot root-snarled bank, and you'd be better off just swimming across to the good beach than bothering to go back the god-forsaken way you had come. That was obviously the reason you never took Keegan's Gulch. This was obvious to every rational thinking adult. Strangely, it never occurred to me how we all knew this until after I moved out of town, when none of us had ever gone there in the first place. Maybe it was moving away that did it, broke the spell, so to speak. I never really had an interest in Keegan's Gulch. I'll admit though, I did grow a little homesick for the town I grew up in. I would occasionally read the monthly paper, read the reviews for the old diner under new management, follow the little small town scandals and gripes concerning the local government. I think what really did it was checking in on my old town haunts on Google Earth. Things looked different from a satellite's perspective, though oddly familiar in a way only a map can provide. Then I'd check the street view and things were largely the same as I'd remembered them, save for a few trivial things. Dirt roads would get paved, the trees were a little bigger, the old church had installed a reader board alongside the road. I saw a major new wing built onto my old high school. There was an empty lot where an abandoned haunted house had once stood, explored by my buddies and me, and no doubt countless other teenage troublemakers. There was the farmhouse where I'd enjoyed my first alcohol-fueled party. There were the dangerous S-curves where my best bud had rolled his cutlass. Fortunately, he'd been unhurt, unlike his ego. There was the lake beach where I'd enjoyed the water many times over the hottest of summer days. There was Mary's Canyon, the pleasant nature trail, with that clear babbling brook that led back to and from town. And there, above it, like a black hairy spider on a Thanksgiving dining table, was an aerial view of Keegan's Gulch. Seeing it like that, being surprised by it like that, I guess that's what spiked my curiosity. I hadn't thought about the place, nor all the warnings about it in many, many years. I suppose that let me see it from a new perspective, perhaps with a bit less bias. The trailhead didn't seem that much further than Mary's Canyon trailhead. The route didn't look that crooked. Sure, the leaves of the trees seemed darker and thicker than the conventional route, but surely it wouldn't be impossible. Certainly not during the summer months when the creek was likely to run dry. And why not just call it a creek? Obviously the flowing water had carved out the gulch. What else could have? Geologically it was a little different than the Mary's Canyon. The place was like the black sheep of my hometown's named location. The only thing that set it apart on my monitor from Mary's Canyon were the digital markers on Google Earth's overlay. There was the green border that showed it was technically a county park. The little squiggly line indicating the trail itself, invisible in this view due to all the foliage. Various photo icons that people have uploaded. Just a few hundred yards north, as the crow flies, was unmarked and unloved wilderness, virgin territory ripe for attention. So I resolved that the next time I was home to visit family, I'd defy all those warnings and go ahead and take the gulch. A couple of young parents with their little kids covered in sunscreen shot me odd looks as I walked past the Mary's Canyon trailhead up to Keegan's Road. There were a lot of destinations out in the countryside that aren't well marked, but you could usually tell that you were there by the number of cars parked up against the shoulder of the road. Mary's Canyon had a whole dirt parking lot. This one didn't even have a turnout. Neither did it have a sign, neither welcoming nor warning. Still, I knew where I was when I got there. The trees had grown thick along the road to my left, dim in the shade under all those maple leaves. Yet when I got where I needed to go, two of the massive trunks were split by a wide gap that clearly extended a long way and led downward out of view because, despite the bright sun, it was nearly pitch black. It looked a bit like a great doorway, at least until you entered and your eyes adjusted. Immediately in there was a set of natural sort of stairs worn into the canyon's side. People had been through here, surely. It just wasn't the heavy-duty aluminium staircase that the parks department had installed on the canyon to the south. It was just uneven layers of dirt compacted by human feet and held up a bit by the thick roots of trees. I enjoyed myself at first. It was a pleasant discovery. I wish it hadn't taken me so long, being so close to my home. Sure, it wasn't the manicured official park alternative, but the foliage was pretty enough. There was a large circular clearing at the base of the bank, surrounded by firs, and the direction of the trail was clear enough. With the stairs soon behind me, the scenery was perfectly fine. The little stream of water had not completely dried, but was running clear along the gulch bed. Being undisturbed by regular foot traffic, it had carved a small meandering trail into the forest soil, a whole river system in miniature. It was small enough that it neither left much mud nor served as an impediment to a hiker. It was easy enough to simply step widely over it to the next solid gravel bar, or leap if the mood suited you. I developed a sort of bouncing rhythm to my hike and felt a bit childish in a good way. It brought back memories of little games I'd play, like avoiding sidewalk cracks or patches of imaginary lava. To either side of me the ground rose at sharp angles, the tops blocked by the foliage. Not that I minded, it seemed quite picturesque. With the angle of the sun, the thick old trunks of the firs seemed black, all backlit by a profuse green glow of sunlight shining through the leaves of the low-covering vine maple. Here the trail grew quite straight, and if anything, the banks grew taller and steeper. I was reminded of some fantasy film. It would be easy to imagine an ambush of ravenous orcs careening down the banks to waylay a party of adventurers. In fact, it was easy to see that the spot, the whole trail even, might be a perfect spot for live-action role-playing for anybody who was into that sort of hobby. The trail grew a bit darker and the plants grew a bit thicker. The concept of a malevolent force descending the gulch just sort of lingered in my head as I walked, and to be honest, sort of festered there. The trip was quite beautiful, and I had no reason for anxiety. All the old warnings were still a psychological cloud hovering over me, and I could hardly fault the gulch for it. The gulch bed remained mostly gravel, with occasional bars of mud or sand at certain meanders. Yet I noticed out in the woods bigger stones that, for some reason, had never washed down the gulch's bed. I knew from my past education in the area that geologically this place had all been carved out by glaciers in the last ice age, so large stones where you wouldn't expect them were hardly unusual, though the number of stones I was seeing was odd, as was their regularity. That seemed more like a thing you'd see back east. None of them were particularly big, none more than 3 feet tall and generally cylindrical. Then it occurred to me, that old story about a mysterious, inexplicable graveyard. If you squinted and used a bit of childish imagination, it wouldn't be hard to see the natural stones as headstones. Perhaps that was a natural explanation for the stories we told as kids, believing that it certainly added to the queer, anxious feeling the sloping gulch walls gave you. I hardly noticed, but my shoes squelched in the mud, then pulled a bit at my sole from suction on the next step. The trail was becoming narrow, and the distinction between the rivulet and the bank became less distinct. Leaping over the rivulet's bed lost any sense, as there was either water or mud regardless of where you stepped. This was about the time I noticed the carvings on the rocks. This took me very much by surprise. Here, again, was the reason a person might be reminded of tombstones. The carvings were infrequent and heavily eroded, at least the first scores of yards. Clearly it wasn't writing or funerary decorations. These weren't gravestones, no, they only suggested such. I puzzled for a while on what it could mean. I thought about ancient petroglyphs, but those were mostly Payan, as far as I could recall, not carvings. and the closest examples of such were hundreds of miles away. No, these carvings couldn't have been some Native American relics. They'd be famous, not shunned. Then it occurred to me that this might be what some people called outsider art. The strange carvings could have been the work of some eccentric recluse. Such people would spend years, decades obsessively crafting various unique artworks in accordance with their creativity or mania. Presumably, these stones had been carved and set here by some inspired, if outlandish, property owners. It was certainly more imposing than any no trespassing sign. I felt a strong sense that I didn't belong here. I didn't doubt that these were the very source of the folk stories. Both those stories were old when I was very young. More than likely whatever oddball had carved these things was long dead. I continued. Besides, I was no doubt closer to the lake now than the trailhead. I had just about concluded those thoughts when I noticed that the carvings further down the trail had grown distinct enough to interpret their intent. They weren't just decorative. Things were all little fat statues of humans, or close enough to hope that's what they were supposed to depict. Maybe they could have been representing some sort of fantastical goblin or boogan, the orcs I'd been imagining about earlier. It varied from idol to idol, but some had eyes that were too big, or fingers, maybe claws that were too big, and it made it harder to see them as human. Some had horizontal sloths across their big round eyes. It made me think of the ivory goggles that the Inuit peoples used to wear, or the alien-like slit-eyed dogu dug up from ancient Japan. The outsider artist had gone to great lengths to place the statues effectively too. They were placed in the center of split, multi-trunked copses of trees. They leered from massive clumps of roots, as if they were hiding or stalking. How odd it was, I thought, that a long-dead artist could predict how the forest would look today. The ornamentations on the statues evolved. Some had erect phalluses or gaping pudenda. They weren't at all erotic to my eye, but seemed to symbolize some sort of fertility message, like Neolithic cave art. Here were the creepy sex weirdos that the adolescent rumors had warned of. If the sequence of the art was similar to the sequence of the stories, then that would mean... Sure enough, the figures grew into gruesome grotesques. They'd lost most of their human aspects but were very devilish and monstrous. Some bore twisting lurid tongues or broken curved teeth and tusks. Some seemed to be smaller versions of themselves. Bas-relief lozenges carved into the bas-relief. The nature of some of these scenes ought to have been droll or dramatic, but these were only horrible. This was when the mud pulled the right shoe clear off my foot. The statuary had been almost hypnotic. I'd lost focus on where I was walking. The trail was almost gone. What was left of it was thick mud. The vine maples had grown close around me, and there were thick bushes of Himalayan blackberry vines growing underneath. I soon gave up any effort of trying to retrieve my shoe while standing on one foot. I conceded to getting my sock, then my pant legs covered in mud. At best, I'd have to walk all the way back with wet socks. I was defeated, and I felt the little excursion had been a big mistake. I suppose that thought was tempting fate. It was only after that I realized how much of a mistake I'd made. I heard a squelch. It sounded like a foot trotting through mud, still distant, out of view and up the trail. Then I heard a second, and a third. Another hiker, the coping part of my brain suggested, just coming in the same direction. The rational part of my brain panicked. Nobody came down this trail. Everybody was warned not to. I consigned my shoe to the mud, turned and ran. I wonder what would have happened if I turned the way I'd come, towards the noise. Maybe that was my last opportunity to make the right choice. Maybe I'd been done for the moment I entered the trailhead. The other shoe was lost after another dozen or so steps. The blackberry thorns tore at my bare arms. I looked down and judged it as not too bad. faint pink scratches. The squelching behind me was getting closer. What was left from that last bit of childish folk rumor? The wolf man? Whatever it was, the mud wasn't even slowing it down. The sound was getting louder, not just because it was getting closer. It sounded like the thing was getting heavier and bigger. The squelching had turned into wet thuds. I looked at my arms again and realized I'd misjudged. Blood was pouring down my arms. The thorns had been so thin, so sharp, that they'd sliced my flesh deeply, and only exerting was revealing how deep they'd cut. More thorns attacked me. I hit a patch of mud and fell forward, pitching face first into a thick puddle. I didn't hesitate to get back up, though the thickness of the mud slowed me. The thing behind me was almost on top of me. I got up to run again. Trees grew right in the middle of what should have been the trail. The water or mud just flowed around it, and I tried to dodge them too. I think I caught a root. A sharp pain reached my brain as I saw the mud racing up to meet me again, as if in slow motion. A broken ankle, I thought as I got up again. I was sure of it. One step, the attempt at a second, and I fell a third time as I put weight on that broken ankle. Fear had made me as thoughtless as I was desperate. I tried hopping as the thing was almost at my ear. On the fifth or sixth hop, I looked down the trail. It seemed a little brighter up ahead, as if the gulch's walls were receding. There was a big patch of blue. It might have been the sky, it might have been the surface of a cool clear lake. Thick mud offers poor purchase. I fell for the last time and tried to crawl. The thorny vines wrapped around me, either from my own clumsiness or had become animated by some supernatural agency. My racing mind couldn't tell the difference. Either way, they fixed me in place as sure as a bale of barbed wire. I turned my doomed head to the side, and there was another one of those statues. Its toothy mouth was agape. I couldn't read its expression. Perhaps glee, perhaps spite, perhaps it was screaming, or perhaps it was rigor mortis. Then the thing behind me on the trail was here. It would have to dig me out of the mud because it had all become quicksand, and I was sinking deep, deep into the earth. The vines tightened as I fell. In my last thoughts, I wondered what would become of my body. I wondered what had become of all the others who'd made this same misadventure. Then I realized they'd been all around me this whole time. Don't go down Keegan's Gulch. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, let me know and hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel and ring my bell so that you don't miss out on future videos and awesome spine-tingling, goosebump-giving stories. If you don't do these things, the like button will haunt your dreams and stalk your days forever.